Is it time for us to be worried?
You're locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1392 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Rangers cutting a handful of players yesterday, and we're going to talk about all of them throughout this episode. But the one that's obviously the headline grabber, the one that was sure to get a lot of Ranger fans talking and already has got a lot of Ranger fans talking, is the cutting of former first-round pick Brennan Othmann. And there's a lot of different ways you can look at this. On one hand, and I mentioned this during a quick video that I recorded for YouTube yesterday afternoon, it's a surprise that Othmann was cut this early in the game, in the preseason. There are 2 preseason games remaining after all. But at the same time, it's not as much of a surprise as we probably would all like it to be. Because in a perfect world, Brennan Othmann would have taken the bull by the horns throughout rookie camp, the rookie series, the preseason games. He would have gone out there and absolutely dominated and really forced the Rangers' hand and essentially left them with no choice but to include him on the opening night roster. And obviously, that is not what happened. If you watch him throughout, really the entire offseason process here, there was nothing really stood out where you were like, oh man, he's got to be out there on opening night. I mean, I'm sorry, but I just didn't feel that way. You guys can let me know if maybe you felt differently about it. But the big question right now, I think on the minds for myself and probably a lot of you as well, is this concerning, or how concerning should this be if you are a fan of the New York Rangers? The fact that Brennan Othmann, who was drafted 4 years ago, all the way back in 2021, number 16 overall in the first round, cannot crack the Rangers roster out of training camp. And not only that, but he was sent down relatively early in the game, as I mentioned just a second ago. This is obviously not an ideal situation. I think if we're all being honest, we as fans, and certainly the Ranger organization, when they drafted Othmann, when they did, again, 4 years ago at number 16 overall, there's no way, I don't think, that they thought that this was exactly how it would go. Now, I don't think it's a death sentence either, the fact that he didn't make the Rangers out of training camp here, but you have to believe by now, all of us and the Rangers themselves, we're probably thinking that Brennan Othmann would be a lineup regular, or at least pretty close to it. In a perfect world, it would be a no-brainer that Brennan Othmann would be on the NHL roster to start the season. But obviously, that is not the case. And you look at his track record so far, I mean, it's a small sample size, but it's not like a microscopic sample size. What Othmann has done in the NHL, 25 games played, he's got no goals and 2 assists. That is not exactly big-time first-round production. Of course, there are extenuating circumstances there. Yes, he's always in the bottom 9, or the bottom 6, rather. Yes, he's never on the power play. Yes, his playing time has been limited. And yes, he's never had, super dynamic, line mates. But even with that being the case, I mean, that's obviously a pretty staggering lack of production on the part of Brennan Othmann. And on top of all that, again, you look at what he did throughout all of camp, throughout these preseason games as well. It was, a fairly unremarkable showing. I think that's a pretty fair term to use for it. To begin with, he was in rookie camp for the 5th time. Now, on one hand, it does sound like, and I remember there being reports about this, don't know who had it, but it sounds like, I think it was one of the Ranger beat reporters, that Othmann was essentially given the choice by the Rangers management. Do you want to attend this rookie camp again? And props to Othmann for wanting to go there, wanting to get to work, not thinking he's above it at this point, wanting to go out there and earn his stripes and do his thing and get ready for the upcoming season. And he did that. But we're at a point now where if you look at the entire offseason as a whole, the entire body of work, whether you want to go back to rookie camp, the rookie series, all of training camp, the preseason games, the entire body of work, when you look at it now, Othmann is falling behind a lot of his fellow Ranger prospects. I think the 3 that really stand out in terms of the forwards are Gabe Perreault, and obviously the Rangers have big plans for him. And I think Perot, really from the moment they drafted him, was always considered probably the number one Rangers prospect, and I don't think that has changed at all. But Perot probably is ahead of Othmann in the pecking order. I think Brett Berard is. He's obviously still in camp, but I think at least has a chance to make the Rangers. And Noah Laba really kind of breaking out throughout this entire offseason, preseason, the rookie series, the whole 9 yards. Laba's looked great. A lot of people, myself included, believe that the Rangers should give really strong consideration to him being out there as the third line center on opening night. Right now, I mean, you look around, you look at what Ranger fans are saying about Brennan Othmann on social media and whatnot. There aren't too many that are really going to bat for him. There might be some people that are pointing the finger at the Rangers development team, or, some of the things that I mentioned earlier where he hasn't always been given a great opportunity to succeed in the NHL. And those things are all, fine and true. But I don't think there's too many people pounding their fists on the table right now saying that Brennan Othmann needs to be on this roster. He just hasn't had that kind of showing here in the offseason. And here's something else. He's now cut by the Rangers at a time where even after this latest run of cuts, and again, we'll talk about the other guys in a little bit here. We'll kind of lump them all together. But he's cut at a time where there were still 27 players left on this Ranger roster, including 14 forwards. Again, he was cut early. And as of today, and this is going to change very soon, but this is an example I use in the short video that I did yesterday. Think about this. Brennan Othmann was cut before somebody like Casey Fitzgerald. And I realized they play different positions, and I realized they're both at different points in their hockey career, and the Rangers have vastly different plans for each of those two players. But nevertheless, it's a fact. The Rangers knew for sure that Brennan Othmann was not going to make this team before they knew for sure that Casey Fitzgerald was not going to make this team. And it's nothing against Fitzgerald, but he is a veteran player, obviously quite a bit older than Othmann, and certainly not a prospect at this point in his career. Now, to update this, because again, we talked about this in the short video yesterday, it does sound like Casey Fitzgerald is going to be placed on waivers a little bit later today, and if he clears, he'll head to the Hartford Wolfpack. That seems likely that will happen, and he's the Wolfpack captain. We're going to elaborate on that a little bit later in today's episode and what it might mean for another Ranger prospect, that being Scott Morrow. But we'll get to that in due time here. But yeah, Othmann, I mean, he was cut along with the likes of Talon Boyko, who is the Rangers' fourth-string goalie. He was also cut alongside players that we basically knew had zero chance of making the team. Guys like Kerry Terrence, guys like Bryce McConnell-Barker. I mean, this is the group that he's lumped in with. He was also cut alongside Brendan Brisson and Connor Mackey, and they were both placed on waivers and have both since cleared. So they'll head to the Hartford Wolfpack. But I mean, these are not like elite high-level prospect players. These are guys that you pretty much knew weren't going to be on the team. I mean, maybe Mackey had a shot at being the seventh defenseman, but for the most part, I mean, obviously the Rangers don't have any grand plans for any of these players, and at least not yet. And that's the group that Brennan Othmann heads to the Wolfpack with. He doesn't get to stick around with the Gabe Perots, with the Noah Labas, with the Brett Berards, with the prospects the Rangers are giving a long look to and possibly even considering for an opening night roster spot. So I don't think that looks good for Brennan Othmann. As far as like who's to blame for this, I mean, I think everybody has a hand. Othmann, for the most part, with the Rangers, just hasn't produced all that much, hasn't done enough to stand out to really stake his claim to a opening night spot on this team. Drury, I think he's going to get a lot of blame. Here's the thing with Drury. So Ranger fans are really tough on Drury, and a lot of it in the last year and a half or so, I do think has been warranted. It hasn't been a banner stretch for Drury for the most part. There's been some good things. There's certainly been some not so good things as well. What you attack Drury is his drafting, because it does take time. Every time there's a draft class, it takes a while for all those players to work their way up to the NHL. The first player that Chris Drury drafted as the general manager of the Rangers, we're not going to count the times where he was the assistant general manager and they took other players, because he wasn't really running the show back then. The first time where he was given the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, and able to draft whichever players he wanted, that was back in 2021. And the first player that Drury selected in that draft was indeed Brennan Othmann. And Othmann could still make it back, and he could still be a good player, and that certainly is a possibility. But right now, again, he's underachieving relative to where the Rangers drafted him, that being right in the middle. We're on the subject here. Drury's first draft class as the GM of the Rangers, it is not good at all. Obviously, Othmann in the first round. We'll run through this quick. The Rangers did not have a second rounder, so nobody picking the second round. In the third round, the third pick of the third round to be exact, they took Jaden Grube. Then they took Ryder Korzak a little bit later in the third round. Then in the fourth round, 3 players, Brody Lamb, Kalle Väisänen, and Talon Boyko. And then in the fifth round, Yaroslav Smolash. And honestly, outside of Othmann, he's probably the guy that's got the best chance of ever doing anything positive with the Rangers in this draft class. And then in the seventh round, you got Hank Kempf. That's it. That is not a good first draft class for Chris Drury. At least it doesn't appear to be on the surface. Othmann could still work out, and maybe Smolash eventually carves out a role for himself on the Rangers. But yeah, that does not look good on paper for Chris Drury. And it's going to happen soon. If it hasn't happened already, sooner or later, people are going to start going after Drury for his drafting. And when you look at this first class, it is less than inspiring. Development or lack thereof, they're going to point at who else? The development, obviously department on the New York Rangers. And they've had results that are mixed at best. I also saw some people that were throwing out the idea of trading Brennan Othmann. And I mean, you could do that, but I don't really like that idea either because the stock is down. And it's the classic case of selling low. I don't know how many people are going to be lining up to give you really anything significant for Brennan Othmann at this time. I mean, you get like a, third round pick, maybe even a second round pick. But I mean, I just don't know that I want to go down that road. I'd rather try to see this thing through to the end. You're basically pot committed, to use a poker term. And at this point, I think you just got to fight your way through it and try to get Othmann to a level that he needs to be at. But to end this on a little bit of a positive note here, there are a couple of things you could point to. He's not 23 until January, just 22 years old right now. Only the 25 NHL games, hasn't gotten ice time, hasn't been out there in any kind of a prominent role. He does play physical hockey when he's out there. That's one thing that nobody can take away from Brennan Othmann, and it's something that we'd like to see more of, or most of us would like to see more of as fans of the New York Rangers. So hopefully he goes down to Hartford, has the right attitude, goes out there, dominates, puts up some big numbers, and forces the Rangers to essentially call him back up and give him another chance. But a little bit disappointing right now, but we'll see what the future holds for Brennan Othmann. We'll obviously be watching him closely moving forward throughout this entire season. So in just a second, we are going to shift our attention to the other 8 players that were cut by the Rangers during training camp and may have just made the New York Rangers, and why I think that would be a great idea. So we'll do all that good stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here. FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you will unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is the best because same game parlays, or you're into player props, or you just want to spice up your favorite team, bet for them, bet against them, whatever it might be. FanDuel's got something just for you. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little more riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, let's go ahead. Keep everything rolling on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers as always. In our next episode, gonna be breaking down the upcoming Thursday night matchup between the Rangers and the Devils. That will be the 5th of 6 preseason games for the Rangers. We're getting there. We're getting pretty close to the start of the regular season, but obviously whatever happens in that preseason matchup, we'll break that down in the next episode. For right now, let's go ahead and talk about the 9 players that were cut by the Rangers just yesterday. And we already talked about Brennan Othmann, so we can move on to the other 8. The other 8 players that were cut, Talon Boyko, Dylan Garand, Hillman, Hartford. The other 2 that were cut, they had to clear waivers, but my understanding is that as of a little bit earlier today, both of them did. That would be Brisson and Mackey. So we'll go ahead and talk about all 8 of these players who will now be members of the Hartford Wolfpack to start this upcoming season. To begin with, Boyko, former 4th-round goalie, kind of looked like a 4th stringer, if we're being honest, throughout most of the the camp and the rookie series and the preseason games as well. Last season, he spent a lot more time in the ECHL than the AHL. 59 games in the ECHL compared to just 5 in the AHL with the Hartford Wolfpack. But he actually put up pretty decent numbers in both leagues last season. Obviously, with the Wolfpack, it is a small sample size, but he did fairly well. It does sound like Boyko's stock has somewhat increased for the Rangers, over the past season or so here. But you got to figure he's in line to back up Dylan Garand, given the fact that he was one of the last 4 goalies in camp for the New York Rangers. So that's the smart money, is that he will be the backup to Garand for the Hartford Wolfpack for this appearance against the Islanders in the first of the 2 preseason games between the Rangers and the Islanders. But I thought he bounced back very nicely in a relief performance against the Islanders in the most recent game. He came in and stopped 9 of 10 shots, made a really nice, really clutch save in overtime, a nice right kick save by Garand to keep the game going. And then, of course, Gabe Pro set up Noah Laba for the game winner, just a matter of seconds after that. But obviously that can never happen if Garand doesn't make that big save. Overall, he's been very good. This is a former 4th rounder. The Rangers seem to like him, quite a bit. One thing that's always stood out about Garand for me is playoff hockey. Now, granted, it's in the AHL. It doesn't have the bright light of the NHL, but it's still pro hockey. It's still the playoffs. And in the last 2 times that the Wolfpack made the playoffs, Dylan Garand basically carried them as far as he could. They got to the round of 8 both times before they eventually lost, but his numbers were very, very good. And watching a couple of those Wolfpack games a couple of seasons ago, yeah, I mean, he was pretty legit, throughout that postseason run. So I like Garand, a little bit up and down throughout the preseason and the training camp here for him. But one thing I will say about Garand is I work for Wolfpack this upcoming season. It's fine for Boyko, obviously, to play some games, but you look at last year, it was Garand and Domingue that basically split the time with the Wolfpack. I mean, Garand had a little bit of an edge. Garand got to play in 39 games. Domingue got to play in 28 games. But I'd like to see Garand get at least 2/3 of the starts this upcoming season. Let's get this guy as ready as possible for NHL hockey, because it's very possible that at the start of next season, we end up seeing Garand as the backup to Igor Shesterkin. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with Jonathan Quick. I don't know what kind of a season he's going to have. If he goes out there and plays well and wants to sign another 1-year contract with the Rangers, his 4th in a row, then by all means. But if he struggles and if he decides that he's going to hang him up at the end of the season, or maybe he even wants to go to a different thing, should get the first crack at being the backup to Igor Shesterkin. And you get him ready for that by having him play, a good amount of games with the Wolfpack. As far as other players that were obviously by the Rangers, you've got defenseman Blake Hillman, now 29 years old. He's played in 4 NHL games. They were all at the Blackhawks, and they were all in 2017, 2018. So it's been a minute since Hillman has been in an NHL game. It's been all AHL and ECHL ever since then. Basically just veteran depth and somebody that, if we're being honest here, I don't think he's going to be very high on the list of call-ups for the New York Rangers this upcoming season. I think there's certainly other defense they would look to before Hillman, but never say never, and we'll see what he can do with the Wolfpack. You've also got Bryce McConnell-Barker. He's a hard-nosed player, and he kind of needs to be, because he doesn't really have a lot of offense, or at least he hasn't thus far in his pro career. 4 points in 68 games with the Wolfpack this past season. So, again, somebody that seems like a bit of a project and doesn't seem likely to make his Ranger debut this upcoming season. Then you've got Dylan Robrick. He actually could make his Ranger debut this year. I don't know that he'll stick in the lineup as a regular, but I do think there's a chance where we go the cup of coffee route that the Rangers seem to like. We saw a couple of years ago, Brennan Othmann got called up for 3 games. The year before that, Will Cooley was called up for 4 games, and then both of them, became regulars, or in Othmann's case, semi-regulars the season after that. There could be, maybe during favorable matchups, maybe when somebody's nursing an injury or whatever it might be, he could honestly debut for the team this season. And he's somebody that has become a personal favorite of mine. To begin with, first thing you're going to notice, the guy's an absolute giant, 6'7", 205 pounds. He's a very physical player. On top of all that, taken in the 6th round back in 2023. So there you go. There's the token giant the Rangers have to take late in every draft. And I love that strategy, because by the time you get to the 5th round, certainly the 6th and 7th rounds, there's only so much information. It really does become a little bit of a dart throw. So why not take somebody that has an asset that you know will never slump? Dylan Roper at 6'7". He's not going to, of a sure thing. And the only thing, once you get to the 6th and 7th round, that is a sure thing to me is size. And taking advantage of that with guys like Edstrom, guys like Rempe in recent seasons. But yeah, I mean, this guy can score. At least he did in the OHL. 72 points in 68 games in his final season in the OHL. And honestly, perhaps even more impressively, what he did with the Wolfpack this past. Ended up with 14 assists, a total of 34 points in 72 games. Not a staggering total, but certainly very, very impressive for somebody who's so young, a former 6th rounder, and getting his first taste of pro hockey. So I thought he played well in the last game against the Islanders too, but he was always a roster long shot at best coming into this preseason here, and we'll keep an eye on him going forward because, like I said, he certainly is a favorite of mine. Then you've got Kerry Terrence, 20-year-old center, former 2nd rounder. He was part of the Chris Kreider trade with the Ducks. Never really a realistic shot to make the Rangers out of training camp this year, if we're being honest. But he has produced in OHL a total of 162 points in 230 games over the course of 4 seasons. Probably still a couple years away from the NHL, but will be interesting to see how he does with his first taste of pro hockey in the AHL with the Wolfpack. And then you had the 2 players that both had to clear waivers. My understanding is that both of them did, and that would be Brennan Brisson and Connor Mackey. We'll start with Brisson. 23 years old. He is a former first rounder by Vegas back in 2020 at 29 overall. So, it's still kind of early in the game for a first rounder. Obviously, he's never really blown anyone away to the point where he can crack an NHL roster with any sort of consistency. Only 8 points in 24 career NHL games, and only 6 points in 16 games last year with the Hartford Wolfpack. And I mean, I don't know. We'll see. He's somebody to keep an eye on going forward, but I don't think he's too high toward the top of Ranger prospects. And then you've got Connor Mackey. He is now 29 years old, big defenseman, 6'3", 204 pounds. Only has played 42 career NHL games. There is kind of a funny story with Mackey, though, from 2 years ago. To begin with, this is funny in and of itself. Mackey has only played 3 games with the Rangers over the last 2 years combined, but he's gotten into 2 fights in that time. And 2 years ago, a game against the Senators in January, when the Rangers were sputtering and they eventually, got it back together and obviously ended up making a deep run in the playoffs, they were going through a little bit of a funk. And Connor Mackey just happened to be in the lineup that night. And the Rangers started that game slow as well. I think they got down 2-0 to the Senators. And then Mackey drops the gloves with somebody and was in quite the brawl there. And then all of a sudden, the Rangers picked it up, and they scored like 6 unanswered goals, and they were fixed, and they were back off to the races, and obviously had a great season 2 years ago. But the joke was that, like, oh, man, Connor Mackey came up and got into a fight and saved the season. It did seem to spark them. That's a phrase that can kind of be overdone from time to time, like, oh, that they're going to get a spark from the fight. No, it actually really happened there, both in that game and the games to come in the immediate aftermath following that game. But, he gets sent down. I thought maybe he had a chance to open the season as the 7th defenseman. But I now believe that since Mackey was sent down and Casey Fitzgerald is going on waivers today, that it probably means that Scott Morrow has made the New York Rangers. And I'll explain why and why I think this is an awesome idea. We'll do that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode by talking a little bit about why Scott Morrow may have just made this New York Ranger team. So, first of all, you come into training camp this year, you come into the preseason, there's a ton of excitement and buzz around the young Ranger players, some of the top prospects in the organization. And that's always the case, but I feel like it was more so than ever this preseason for a couple of reasons. One being the fact that this team was so bad last year that I think any new player, any new blood, it probably just feels like a breath of fresh air for a lot of us. That's part of it. But I think even more importantly, there were a lot of prospects, a lot of young players for this Ranger team coming into camp that actually had a pretty good chance to maybe force their way onto the roster, at least have a shot at it. And even if they didn't do that, guys that at the very least, I think would turn some heads, and in many cases have turned some heads. I think Morrow has turned some heads. I think certainly Perot and Laba have turned some heads. Brett Berard has played hard, and he's looked good in a lot of these games as well. So it's exciting. It's a lot of fun. There's a whole new wave of prospects on the way for the New York Rangers. But one who maybe didn't have quite the buzz as some of the others that I just mentioned is Scott Morrow. Despite the fact that he, at the beginning of camp, and certainly now, I think probably has the clearest path to being in the opening night lineup for the Rangers. Obviously, Morrow, for anybody that needs a refresher, he was acquired in the Keandre Miller trade. Miller goes to the Canes in exchange for a first rounder, a second rounder, and Scott Morrow. And I think Morrow might have just made this team. And the reason I believe this, I mean, there's a few reasons, but first and foremost, again, I sort of have Fitzgerald still in the running to be the Rangers' number 7 defenseman, because if Scott Morrow was not going to make this team, then you're probably looking at a situation where Vakanainen is in the opening night lineup as the number 6 defenseman, and then Fitzgerald, the veteran, the Wolfpack captain, he would be the number 7 defenseman and the healthy scratch on opening night. But now that we know that Fitzgerald is not going to be here on opening night, that to me pretty much kicks down the door for Scott Morrow, because with Fitzgerald being gone and very likely going unclaimed on waivers and hanging to the Wolfpack, you are left with just 8 defensemen for the Rangers. And 5 of them are very, very clearly going to make the team. Gavrikov, Fox, Susie, Borgen, and Schneider. I know some people might fight me on Susie. I mean, he's like 95% at least to be out there on opening night, I would say, barring a trade or anything completely unforeseen. So that just leaves the 6th spot. You're not going to have Morrow as the number 7 defenseman. That's the one thing you can't do with Morrow. Morrow either needs to be a lineup regular for the Rangers, or he needs to not be on the team at all and play for the Hartford Wolfpack instead. You can't have a prospect like him rotting away in the press box every single night. And on top of all that, the Rangers are down to only 8 defensemen that remain in training camp. All the guys I just mentioned, plus Matthew Robertson. And at this stage in the game, I really can't see Matthew Robertson beating out Scott Morrow for a roster spot. I mean, what would that even look like? So if Morrow doesn't make the team and Robertson does, then I think Vakanainen would still be the number 6 defenseman, but then you have Robertson as the healthy scratch. And in theory, Robertson is still a prospect, although, I mean, I don't know where that's going. He's only played 2 games, despite being a former second rounder. Would Robertson be in the lineup and Vakanainen would be the healthy scratch? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. I can't imagine that that's the road they're going to go down. So really, by default, we've pretty much ruled out every other option for the Rangers. That would mean that Morrow is going to make this team. He will very likely be the number 6 defenseman. Vakanainen would very likely be the number 7 defenseman. The only other thing I'll say about this is that if Morrow does make the team, he needs to be in the lineup every night or virtually every night. It's okay, I think, if once in a while, and I emphasize once in a while, he comes out of the lineup. You give Vakanainen a game to get him in there, keep him fresh, not have him rot away for months at a time in the press box. But when I say once in a while, I'm talking about like at best Vakanainen, and I would even lean more toward like once every 8 or 9 games, to be completely honest. So again, looking at the lay of the land right now, I think Morrow has made this team, and I think that's a good idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. He's mostly done well throughout the entire rookie camp, the rookie series, all the preseason as well. He's played in all 4 of the Rangers preseason games thus far. And I think that in and of itself is a good sign, because that says to me that the Rangers are taking him seriously, that they want to get a nice long look at him. I mean, they know guys like Mika Zibanejad are going to be on this team, and JT Miller. I mean, Miller's hurt right now and working his way back, but you know what I mean. The guys are very likely the guys that are on the roster bubble, and they're the guys that the coaches want to get the longest look at and the fairest look at, because they got to determine if this guy is going to make the team or not. And I think that's certainly the case here with Scott Morrow. On top of that, in the 4 games, take this for what it's worth. It's a small sample size, but he has scored a goal. It did so happen to be a game-winning goal. He also has felt like Morrow. The one thing I'll say maybe against him just a little bit, to me, he stood out more in the rookie series against the Flyers cumulatively than he has in the 4 preseason games. And that does make sense, because the competition in those rookie games is not as fierce, I guess, as it would be in the preseason games. You're playing with other guys that are trying to make teams, and guys that are established NHL veterans, and in some cases NHL stars. We just saw the game against the Islanders. They played just about everybody that's going to be out there on opening night, and the Rangers were able to pull off that win. But that's a good experience for somebody like Scott Morrow. And if nothing else, I don't think Morrow has been a liability throughout the preseason. And sometimes That's all you want from your sixth defenseman. That's all you want, maybe in some instances, from your third pairing. They're not necessarily guys that are going to go out there and win the game for you, but at least don't lose the game. Don't make mistakes, make simple plays, be in the right position, play physical hockey if that's part of your game, chip in every once in a blue moon on offense, and we're all good. Sometimes that's all you need from your third pair. And I think that's also the case with Morrow. Now, Morrow does have some offense to his game, and that's another reason why I do like the idea of him being there on opening night for even strength as well as the power play. Because when you look at even strength right now, the Rangers don't really have a lot of offense coming from their defensemen. Obviously, with Fox, yes, there's offense there. Gavrikov, he'll get a decent amount of assists. He'll chip in every once in a while. And Borgen, not certainly known as an offensive defenseman, but did produce more offensively for the Rangers, racked up a few more points with the Rangers than he had at any other point in his career. But in terms of like a guy that's really going to give you some offense, I think it's Morrow, second only to Fox among the Ranger defensemen. And when we look at the power play specifically, that's another reason why I think it makes sense to have Morrow on this roster, because if he's not there, which defenseman is on the second power play unit for the Rangers? And I realize it's the second unit, and if this looks the way it does in previous seasons, then it probably means that the Rangers' second power play unit isn't even going to be out there all that often. So is it really that big of a deal? I get that. And you could also go with 5 forwards on your second unit, but that didn't look good at all when the Rangers tried it last season. You could always go with somebody maybe like Braden Schneider on the second power play unit. But to me, I think Morrow, if he's not there, that second unit will be missing something. So I think it makes sense for him to make the team and him to be in that role for the Rangers on opening night. And he should be a lineup regular, like we just said, right from the start of everything, right from the start of the season. So I figure we can call it there. But yeah, I mean, to me, again, looking at the lay of the land, I think Scott Morrow just made this team. We'll see. Maybe the Rangers will pull a fast one on all of us, and it'll be Vakanainen out there on opening night, and Robertson is the seventh defense. I mean, who knows? You never know for sure what the New York Rangers are going to do. But connecting the dots here, all signs point to on this team. And again, I think that's a good thing. I'm all for it. But we'll call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, it is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely GHIK17, and definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.